Hi, my name is Robert and I'll be talking about the OET speaking criteria. Now, my basis for this video will be the speaking assessment criteria and level descriptors from the occupationalenglishTest.org since 2018. So you know that this is legit, this is real, this is what the assessors are actually looking for when you take your OET speaking exam. Now, I will point out that this from September 2018 is important because before 2018, there was OET 1.0, which only focused on the linguistic criteria. Later on, they realized that the linguistic criteria was not enough to assess how effective of a nurse or healthcare professional the person would be when they work in UK or Australia. And so they came up with OET 2.0. They added a completely different part to the criteria. Instead of just linguistic criteria, they added also the communication criteria, which I personally believe is much more important and a better gauge of how effective a nurse will be when they migrate or work in UK. But first, let's talk about the linguistic criteria. It's not that different from how it was before, but as I said again, this is not the more important part. It starts off with intelligibility, which is just a fancy word for how you pronounce words. Is your pronunciation accurate? Can you be understood by the patient or understood by the assessor in the recording? Take note that the person doing the role play with you will not be grading you. Instead, a recording of your role play will be sent to someone in Australia, and they will base your intelligibility or pronunciation grade just on the audio recording. So that's how they assess it, and that's how you can tell that they're really trying to be as fair and objective as possible, even though speaking tests in general really rely on the examiner's opinion. The next one is fluency. I think that's pretty much easy enough to understand. It just means no ums, no dead air, no awkward pauses, and just make sure that you're speaking continuously. Then there's appropriateness of language. Now, a lot of students have this misconception that you need to use medical, technical terms, but I think what's really important is that everyone realizes when you talk to a patient, the patient isn't a medical professional. You're probably talking to an 80-year-old man who's never had to deal with any medical terms in his entire life. So when you talk about appropriateness of language, can a layman understand the terms you are using? Is it easy for them to understand what you are saying, or are there a lot of difficult technical terms that a layman cannot understand? So the moment you start talking about their hemoglobin count or how their respiratory rate is at certain whatever, or how the certain condition has affected their neurological system, it's going to give you a poor grade in appropriateness of language. I strongly recommend that you talk to the patient as if you were talking to your own mother. How would your mother understand the details that you're trying to explain? I think that's a very good gauge. Most of our mothers are not medical professionals, and so you can imagine how explaining something that's medical should be done in a very simple and layman way. Next criteria doesn't need explanation, resource of grammar and expression. In short, just make sure you're not speaking with too many grammatical errors. The main point is really just so that you're understood. That's what the linguistic criteria is for. Can you be understood? Now, as I mentioned, after 2018, they added the more important part, which is the communication criteria. And if you scroll here to the bottom, you'll see now that they've added things such as relationship building. So what does relationship building mean? It's really more about trust for me. Can you get the patient to trust you? Can you get them to like you in general? And one way you can do that is just by greeting, giving your introduction, mentioning who you are, your purpose in this role play, or how you're going to help the patient. Being attentive, respectful, and make sure not to be judgmental. Make sure to be open, and most importantly, I think this is what most students lack, showing empathy, showing feelings, or showing emotions. They realize that while a lot of students may have had good pronunciation, fluency, appropriate language, and grammar, most of them didn't really speak with the right emotional tone. Some would sound irritable, others would sound like a robot. So take note, if you are speaking in a monotone, you are going to get a failing grade in relationship building. Your job is to show that you care for the patient. Don't just go, "Hi ma'am, my name is Robert. I'll be your nurse for the day. Could you please tell me what the problem is?" Because if you sound like that, it doesn't feel like there's any empathy, and you will get a failing grade in relationship building. The next one is understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective. In short, understand the patient. The way I like to think about this criteria is, can you put yourself in the patient's shoes? Can you look at the situation from the perspective of the patient? And how will you do that unless you ask questions? You have to ask and explore the patient's ideas, concerns, and expectations. Because if you go into the role play assuming you know the patient's problem, assuming you know how the patient feels, you'll get a failing grade in understanding, incorporating the patient's perspective. Remember, you're not supposed to adopt a judgmental approach. You're supposed to be non-judgmental. And that means you're not supposed to assume anything. Even if you're given the role play card that may give you some information about the patient, it's your job to ask questions such as, how are you doing today? How do you feel? What problems have you been experiencing lately? Is there anything I can do to help? How would you like me to help you? So I believe asking questions is such an important part of understanding the patient. The more you ask, the better your score will be here. Now, the next one is providing structure, but a lot of students misinterpret this as following the task exactly as is presented, when in fact, it's not really about following the task. What the criteria here is checking for is, can you respond accordingly to the patient's concerns? So when it says sequence the interview purposefully and logically, it should make sense. If a patient starts talking about a certain pain or problem, even if it's not in the task that you should ask about the pain or problem, you should ask that patient, how painful was it? Where did it start hurting? When did this pain begin? We don't blindly follow the task chronologically. We respond to the patient logically and accordingly. So I hope that's clear in providing structure. It's really more about being able to pick up on the patient's cues also and respond accordingly, not just blindly following a task or template. Next is info gathering. I mentioned how important it is to ask questions here, even more so. When it says here to use open questions, what they're checking for is your ability. So you're providing structure. Next up, we have something about info gathering. When it says open questions, you should ask questions to start with who, what, when, where, why, and how. We should avoid questions that are answerable by yes or no. So avoid yes or no questions. If you're just going to ask, are you okay? Yes. Are you in pain? No. Are you good to go home? Yes. Then what information have you gathered from the patient? If your questions are going to start with who, what, when, where, why, or how, however, then you will get more information out of the patient. So that's what we're really testing for. Don't ask, are you in pain? Ask, where do you feel pain? How painful is it? When did this pain begin? Why do you think it's painful when you do this? Or other questions like, what have you done to fix this pain? Not, is it painful? Yes. Are you in pain? No. You need to get more information out of the patient. Now, the last criteria here is infogiving, and it's simply not about medical terms. I think a lot of students think that they have to be smart and give medical information. It's more about how easy or how simple the information is. So your job is really to simplify information, simplifying. How do you simplify info? First of all, you have to ask what the patient already knows, so that when you start talking to them, it's about the things they're not clear with yet or do not know about. Pausing periodically when giving info. Don't talk nonstop. Take the time to pause and clarify. Was that clear? Did you understand? Is there anything you'd like to ask? That's also checking whether the patient has understood information and encouraging the patient to contribute reactions or feelings. How does this treatment make you feel? Are you open to discussing your weight? It's important to also ask the patient what other information the patient might need by closing with, do you have any questions? Or is there anything else you'd like to know? A lot of students think that you need to be able to give information accurately and medically, when in fact, remember, appropriateness of language says that you're supposed to give information in layman terms. And all this criteria is checking for is whether you were able to give it easily in a way that was understood. Well, I hope I've also done that in this video. I know it's a lot to take in, but remember, guys, that it's not just about how you speak. It's about how you communicate and build a relationship with a patient. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for your time and good luck with your review.